Boris Johnson under fire again. He compares the French president to a prison guard. Downing Street defends the Foreign Secretary, but he's condemned by European leaders for his crass comments.
If Monsieur Hollande wants to administer punishment beatings to anybody who chooses to escape, rather in the manner of some sort of World War II movie, then I don't think that is the way forward.
Also tonight, jets fly into the Gambia to evacuate British holidaymakers because of a threat of civil war. A court rules bus drivers must ensure priority for wheelchair users over baby buggies. And tributes to a trailblazer for women's sport, Rachael Heyhoe Flint, who's died aged 77.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. Theresa May was tonight enveloped in a whole new Brexit storm over a remark by her Foreign Secretary. Yesterday's tricky keynote speech by the PM had been broadly well received, even among top Eurocrats, and Mrs May emerged intact from a combative Commons question time today. But then came Boris Johnson's unscripted intervention, comparing France's President Hollande to a World War II prison guard administering punishment beatings. Abhorrent was just one of the many instant condemnations, as our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
The Prime Minister could have been forgiven for congratulating herself on yesterday's well-received speech on Brexit, although not everyone would choose their words so carefully today. In Europe, heads were turned by Mrs May's speech, although Angela Merkel, hosting the Italian Prime Minister, was characteristically cautious in her remarks. The be-all and end-all is that Europe does not let itself be divided, she said, and we will ensure that with very intensive contacts. In Strasbourg, the European Council President warned against a pick-and-mix Brexit, but was otherwise diplomatic.
I want to underline that we took note of the warm and balanced words of Prime Minister May on European integration, which were much closer to the narrative of Winston Churchill than that of the American President-elect Trump.
But another Churchill fan, the Foreign Secretary, was rather less diplomatic. Responding to comments from a French government source, he compared the French president to a World War II prison guard.
I think that if Monsieur Hollande wants to administer punishment beatings to anybody who chooses to escape, rather in the manner of some sort of World War II movie, then I don't think that is the way forward. And I think actually it's not in the interests of our friends and our partners.
The Swedish Prime Minister told ITV News that Mr Johnson should grow up.
We have said all the time from the Swedish point of view that we need to act, everybody needs to act adult, and we need to act in a pragmatic way. It's a very complicated situation. It's not good for the European Union, so let's not make it worse.
Not what the Prime Minister needed as she fended off Labour criticisms of her Brexit plan.
Can I urge her to stop her threat of a bargain basement Brexit? A low-pay tax haven on the shores of Europe. It won't necessarily damage the EU, but it would certainly damage this country.
What I set out yesterday was a plan for a global Britain, bringing prosperity to this country and jobs to people and spreading economic growth across the country. I've got a plan. He doesn't have a clue.
This evening, Mrs May travelled to the World Economic Forum in Davos, where she hopes to spend time promoting her Brexit strategy rather than defending her Foreign Secretary. But Downing Street were clearly exasperated today to find themselves having to defend Boris Johnson, saying he hadn't called anyone a Nazi. Now, it won't derail anything, but it's clearly very unhelpful at such a sensitive time, and things will only get more difficult. Next Tuesday, the Supreme Court could well order the Prime Minister to hold a vote in Parliament before she even begins the process of leaving the European Union.
Carl, thank you. Hundreds of Britons are scheduled to arrive back in the UK tonight after their luxury holidays in West Africa were suddenly cut short over fears for their safety. Growing political unrest in the Gambia is threatening around 3,500 British holidaymakers. The Foreign Office says only essential travel should be undertaken to the Gambia, where Senegalese troops are now said to be massing on the border. It's estimated between 50 and 60,000 British tourists a year visit the Gambia. More from our Africa correspondent, John Ray.
They came for the promise of African sun. Instead, there's an anxious wait at a stifling airport to escape a crisis reaching boiling point.
It's not very good news. It's basically that we are going to evacuate everyone back home today. Today? Yes, today.
Almost 1,000 British package tourists out first, but another 2,500 travellers on flight-only deals will have to wait amid deepening turmoil.
I wasn't worried until now. I thought everything would go smoothly. But now with everybody panicking, I'm beginning to panic myself.
Staff have been fantastic here, keeping calm. But it's a front, you can see it in people's eyes, they're quite scared.
Just 6 hours from the UK.
A tiny former British colony, the Gambia is promoted as the Smiling Coast. But for 2 decades it's been ruled over by President Yahya Jammeh, a dictator accused of torture and murder. In a stunning development, he lost last month's elections, but refuses to stand down.
Hereby declare a state of public emergency.
Fearing violence, Gambians have been fleeing in their thousands, but only yesterday did the Foreign Office tell Britons to steer clear.
The Foreign and Commonwealth Office are the experts in these matters. We're obliged to start to execute a repatriation plan, which has started this morning.
The first British holidaymakers are due home tonight, with troops from neighbouring Senegal tonight heading to the border, threatening to force Gambia's president out. It could be the tourists are heading home just in time. John Ray, ITV News.
A disabled passenger is tonight hailing what he claims is an important victory in his legal battle over wheelchair access on buses. The Supreme Court stopped short of requiring bus companies to enforce priority for wheelchair users in designated spaces, but campaigner Doug Paulley said today's partial victory was still a significant cultural change. Rebecca Barry was in court.
So is it fair empty baggies stay there on a wheelchair priority and you as
she's a priority
passenger?
as well, she's got 2 kids.
A typical morning for a disabled person trying to get on a bus. She can't because the wheelchair space is taken up by a buggy.
You're rude, you're very rude.
Then come on the bus, you're holding up the bus.
You're going
for everybody, can you come on the bus?
Eventually the buggy's folded away and the tearful woman can get on with her journey.
I think
All this happened just over the road from the Supreme Court, just after it had made a landmark ruling on the rights of wheelchair users. When something similar happened to Doug Paulley, he took the bus company to court.
Cheers.
And after a 5-year legal battle this morning, the highest court in the land ruled that bus companies must do more to help wheelchair users.
This is a major day for rights of disabled people. Catching the bus is a fundamental thing that most people expect to be able to do.
The ruling means it's not enough for the driver to simply request that someone make space for a wheelchair user. Instead, they must consider taking further steps to pressurise someone to move.
How would you feel if the bus driver said, no, you have to take your baby out, fold the buggy up and make space for the wheelchair?
It's my baby, I don't want to wake him up and make him upset and make him cry.
Disabled person has got priority.
Even if your baby was fast asleep?
I think so.
What do we want? Access!
But it's still not a legal requirement for a passenger to move for a wheelchair user.
The driver has to require somebody to move away. That is really tough, particularly because the driver has no legal redress behind him. So he can do nothing if that passenger still refuses to move.
Get on the bus then.
Campaigners say it's a victory for the UK's 1.2 million wheelchair users and say they'll be pressing the government to update the law in light of today's ruling. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Two top British sprinters have been seriously injured in a motorbike accident in Tenerife. James Ellington, a former Olympian, and Nigel Levine are stable in hospital after the crash. The athletes, both previous winners of European relay golds, were on the island for a British athletics training camp. The family of teenager Leon Weeks say they are devastated at the loss of their beautiful daughter and sister. The 16-year-old was found with multiple stab wounds in Rotherham on Monday. Police are questioning a man and a woman. Labour is to face a major challenge from UKIP in the by-election for the seat formerly held by Tristram Hunt. ITV News understands UKIP's new leader, Paul Nuttall, will contest Stoke Central. Well, let's go to our political correspondent, Emily Morgan, who's at Westminster. Emily, UKIP clearly regards this as very winnable then.
Yes, they do. They've always said that they will throw the kitchen sink at this by-election because a win in Stoke Central would be a pivotal moment for UKIP. Applications for candidates have now closed. I understand that Paul Nuttall's papers are in, and in all likelihood he will be announced as the candidate on Saturday. He does have a very good chance in Stoke Central. The city voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union. 64% wanted out, so they will hope to try and capitalise on that sentiment. They will also try and woo disaffected Labour voters who want something done about immigration and don't have any faith in Jeremy Corbyn. But look, this is a real test for UKIP. If they want to reinvent themselves as the party of the working class, they will need to win seats from Labour like this one. Labour are aware of this. Jeremy Corbyn is defending a 5,000 majority. It is one of his very big tests too, so it's going to be a very big fight.
Emily, I'm sure it will be. Thank you. Still to come on the ITV Evening News. With just 2 days to go until President Trump's inauguration, we examine what his victory means for campaigners both for and against gun control. That story and the rest of the day's news after this break. Welcome back. It promises to be a presidential inauguration like no other when Donald Trump takes the oath of office on Friday. Already it's threatening to be a day of division rather than the more traditional celebration of national unity. A boycott by many leading Democrats is gathering pace, with 54 members of Congress vowing to stay away. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore has the latest on the Trump inauguration.
Briefly last night, Donald Trump was in Washington ahead of the inauguration to make comments to foreign ambassadors, showing goodwill, but also praising his own cabinet selections.
We have great respect for your countries. We have great respect for our world. We have put together a team, I think the likes of which has never been assembled before.
Shut it down! Shut it down! But there are sights and sounds he will become familiar with as he travels around Washington in the next few days. Hell no! Protests are certain to build ahead of the swearing-in ceremony. No Trump! And a huge march against his presidency is planned for Saturday. On breakfast television this morning, Trump again denied that the Russians are holding any compromising material that could be used to blackmail him.
It's made up, never existed, never happened. And the reason I say that so strongly, because nothing's ever going to show up. There's never going to be a tape that shows up. There's never going to be anything that shows up.
But on Capitol Hill today, a sense of the epic political battles ahead. Trump's choice is America's top environmental advisor, refusing to be drawn on the cause of climate change.
I'm asking your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
Really?
To the job of
you are going to be the head of the agency to protect the environment, and your personal feelings about whether climate change is caused by human activity and carbon emissions is immaterial?
Trump has just released this photo, showing him writing the address for the inauguration. But while preparations for the event are well underway, 50 members of Congress are boycotting the ceremony.
I will work with them where we can, but I just didn't want to go celebrate or legitimize or normalize his presidency.
Donald Trump is now just 2 days away from assuming power. promising major changes to how America does business at home and around the world.
We understand that his inaugural address will be short, at about 20 minutes. We're told that it'll be deeply personal and that the main theme, wait for it, will be national unity. Now, that may be a pretty hard sell given that Donald Trump is such a deeply polarizing and divisive figure. And in fact, his latest approval rating is down to about 40%. That is the lowest ever recorded for an incoming president.
Robert, thanks very much for that. Well, one of the biggest issues facing the new president is likely to be one that caused Barack Obama most grief. The outgoing president shed public tears in the wake of massacres like Sandy Hook. Now, though, the hopes and fears on either side of the gun control debate are sharply divided as to what difference President Trump might make. Martin Geisler reports.
In a suburb of Denver, Colorado, paying customers are being taught a new skill. At the Active Shooter Response Center, civilians get military-style training in how to eliminate an armed threat. It is intense. But with gun crime so prevalent, there's a massive market for this.
It's a reality. You know, if I've got something that I care about, my children, my family, I want to be able to protect that. If there's a legitimate threat, then I need to know how to do that.
Guns are big business in Colorado. In this range alone, 1 million bullets are fired each month. The owner, Dick Abramson, sells firearms too. Lots of them.
They look ferocious. Well, they're really fun to shoot.
The gun debate has divided America, but Dick and his customers believe they will now have a president who understands and supports their passion and their right to carry arms.
It bodes very well for the future because we believe that it's going to be a pro-gun administration.
Look at all these students. This is just. But this place has seen horrors inflicted with firearms as well. Columbine High School is just 15 miles from Dick's gun store. In 1999, 2 pupils murdered 12 fellow students and a teacher here in a massacre that shocked America.
It changed everything. I measure my life as before Columbine and after Columbine.
Tom Mauser's son Daniel was killed at Columbine. Since that day, he's devoted his life to a campaign for tighter gun laws. He's made some progress, but it's been hard. And now he fears President Trump will undo everything that's been achieved.
I think we're going to see a push for eliminating what they call the gun-free zones so that they allow for guns in schools, in public buildings, on military bases. You know, their whole thing is if we had more guns around, we'd be safer.
And you think Trump's going to buy into that?
I think Mr. Trump is going to be forced to buy into that.
This is what he means.
On November 8th, you, the 5 million men and women of the National Rifle Association of America.
The NRA, one of the most powerful lobby groups in this country, donated $30 million to the Trump campaign. Now, emboldened, they're demanding he ensures gun laws are changed.
This is our historic moment to go on offense and defeat the forces that have aligned against our freedom once and for all.
Back at the firing range, a group of Girl Scouts have come in for a lesson.
Now make the rainbow. Yeah.
Aged just 11, they're being taught how to use a handgun safely. Not irresponsible, say their instructors, quite the opposite. But with more than 15,000 gun deaths in America last year alone, President Trump must decide how he's going to handle an epidemic that's causing misery nationwide. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Denver, Colorado.
One other bit of news from the United States, and former President George Bush Sr. is in intensive care in hospital tonight. Mr. Bush is said to be in a stable condition after suffering acute breathing problems brought on by pneumonia. Doctors had to intervene to clear his airway. Mr. Bush led the coalition in the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein in 1991. And a reminder that we have a special programme from the US on Friday. Join Tom Bradby for President Trump, the inauguration. Our coverage begins at 4 p.m. Tennis now, and Britain's number 3, Dan Evans, took the biggest scalp of his career in the second round of the Australian Open today. He came from a set down to beat the 7th seed and former Grand Slam champion, Croatia's Marin Cilic. Meanwhile, Andy Murray progressed smoothly to the third round, easily beating Russia's Andrei Rublev. Finally, the death has been announced today of a cricketer who played a major role in changing the face of sport. As captain of the national team and former holder of the highest individual test score, Rachael Heyhoe Flint blazed a trail for women in sports that had previously been seen as male preserves. Our sports editor Steve Scott reports.
Rachael Heyhoe Flint was a pioneer, breaking new ground with almost everything she turned her hand to. She made her name as an exceptional cricketer, playing for England for an astonishing 22 years. She was captain for 12 of them, including when they won the first ever Women's World Cup in 1973. She was an all-rounder in the broadest sense of the phrase, even playing in goal for England's hockey team. Heyhoe Flint was a formidable opponent off the pitch too, embarrassing cricket's 200-year-old all-men's club, the MCC, into allowing women members for the first time.
It's quite unbelievable. I never imagined that it could happen, but, you know, God takes a few years to work miracles, and perhaps I've succeeded in this respect. It's absolutely wonderful.
After cricket, she turned her hand to journalism and broadcasting. In 2008, an OBE followed the MBE she'd already been awarded. And then in 2011, Heyhoe Flint was made a life peer, reflecting her services to cricket and charity.
She was passionate about women being given every opportunity in the game, whatever level, as a participant, as a member of the MCC, as a member of the media. She was devoted to seeing those strides being made for our sport.
A single-figure handicap golfer, Rachael Heyhoe Flint possessed a rare determination and unbreakable spirit. She leaves behind husband Derek, their son, 3 stepchildren and a legacy unrivalled in women's sport.
The cricketer Rachael Heyhoe Flint, who's died aged 77. Well, that's it from us for now. Mary will be live from Washington tomorrow at 6:30 on the eve of Donald Trump's inauguration. So do join her for that. But for me and all of the team here this evening, enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.